Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. Bit of a different one today. Thought I would do a topic which I've never seen done before, at least in the vinyl community. No doubt there are YouTube videos out there about it. But just linking into the release of the re-release of George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. There's so many unboxing videos going on and people doing reviews, etc, etc. So I thought I would take a different angle on it and do a video that I've been wanting to do for quite a long time and just never got round to it. And just asking the question really, what did George Harrison actually believe? That is, in terms of his spiritual beliefs, his religious beliefs. It's an interesting topic, I think. Part of the reason that I find it interesting is that Beatles fans generally, George fans in the main, whatever, don't take a great deal of interest in George's actual spiritual beliefs. Now, I can't pretend to be any different, really. I did take more of an interest in it in my younger days, and I did read certain texts, and I did explore it a bit, and, came away from it with a generally positive vibe. But I wouldn't call myself a believer in the sense that George was or anything. But over the years, if you listen to Beatles fans talking about George's work, very, very rarely will anybody actually talk about the lyrics. And to me, George Harrison's spirituality, it's like the musical equivalent of Yoko Ono, in that, Beatles fans kind of have to acknowledge it, as in they have to acknowledge its existence. George did ram his religion down people's throat for quite a while in the 70s, and his music did become increasingly, spiritual. By the time he got to Dark Horse, he was really going for it. He was doing live concerts. He was changing Beatles lyrics to reflect his love of the Almighty, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I thought I would just do a really, really quick, and I just have to say, I am not an expert in the Hindu religion or anything. I'm sure there'll be people watching this video and just wondering why on earth I am even attempting to do this, so I do apologise if I make any terrible mistakes here, but I'll kind of run you through my understanding of George's spirituality, and we'll see where that takes us. So, George was a Catholic. George was brought up as a Catholic in Liverpool, and so I guess what I would say to start with is that therefore he was probably already predisposed to believe in a set of supernatural tenets. Catholicism is founded on a range of what you might call supernatural beliefs. And to people who believe in the faith, those beliefs are very real. To people coming from the outside, some of them seem a little bit outlandish. But, I guess that George he already had a seed of something in him. But when he discovered Hinduism and the Krishna faith in the 60s, he always said that it transcended anything that he'd known about religion originally, because to him, the problem with Catholicism, or the problem with Christianity at large, is that you don't get to have a direct experience with God. You just get to say the prayers, sing the hymns, and there's always an intermediary there. There's always there's a vicar, there's a priest, whatever. There's a kind of intermediate figure. You can't have a direct contact with God, and I think that's what George liked about Hinduism. Although oddly enough, he was a real one for following gurus and so on. So, I'm not quite sure how he squared that. But, the story's been well told. I think he was on the set of the Help movie, wasn't he, when he stumbled across a sitar, and that led him to contact Ravi Shankar, get some sitar lessons, and then he kind of tumbled into this world of Indian spirituality, started reading a lot of sacred texts, and he kind of seemed to be a bit of an instant convert, really. He kind of jumped straight into it. And I don't think George was not what you might call a kind of intellectual. I don't think he'd done a great deal of reading beforehand. It's interesting, if you talk about Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy, the main difference between them is that in Western philosophy you're kind of taught or trained to question everything and to explore concepts. It's quite scientific, whereas Eastern mysticism kind of requires you to just believe at the outset. You believe this fundamental thing, and then everything else falls into place. So I don't think George's approach to religion was particularly critical in that sense. But what's interesting is that he started to take it very seriously, and he became quite critical of anybody who kind of didn't believe it, and that started to filter through into, you know, certain songs. He got a bit finger pointy at times. But what did he actually believe? You know, does anybody know? What's interesting is that, I mean, George went hell for leather into the world of Krishna. And, you know, this is one of the absolute sacred texts of the Hindu religion, the Bhagavad Gita. And essentially what this book is, it's a kind of dialogue between Krishna, who's one of the avatars of God, if you will, and a warrior, Arjuna, on the field of battle. And it's a philosophical treatise, it's a discussion about the nature of God, about the nature of the self. But I mean, my understanding is that, you know, to Hinduism at large, Krishna is not necessarily the be-all and end-all for everybody. Krishna is one of the avatars of God. He is meant to be God, but only the Hare Krishnas, my understanding is, kind of really elevated him to that extent, and they kind of really, you know, worship him as the supreme being. The stories of Krishna, if you read the stories of Krishna, they're kind of like fairy stories or parables. You know, they're very imaginative, they're very poetic, as you could argue the Bible is. You know, a lot of the stories in the Bible, Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, you know, to anyone not born of the faith, they are clearly poetic, imaginative stories. They're not to be taken literally. It's only when you become an ardent believer in the religion that you start to take these beliefs very, very seriously. And what's interesting is that my interpretation is that George did start to believe these stories, at least at first anyway, in the 60s. He got very, very into the whole Krishna movement. You know, he moved them into his house, and he got very into chanting, which is a very, very deep-held belief in Hinduism, this idea that you chant a religious word or mantra, and that helps you to transcend the physical realm. George got very into that idea, as did John. I mean, George always claimed that his spirituality, the trigger for it was an acid trip, where he basically looked around and he said he could see God in every blade of grass. It's that classic, you know, Aldous Huxley thing, doors of perception. And his immediate reaction was to see the universe as being a manifestation of God. And it seemed to be a very open-minded thing. But as he got further into the Krishna faith, he seemed to get a bit more tunnel vision about Krishna. And if you read interviews with him from the second half of the 60s, by which time he'd started getting involved with a couple of fairly, what you might call, fundamentalist gurus. I'm not talking about the Maharishi, strangely enough, because I don't think he was particularly a Krishna person, but he'd kind of got involved with the Krishna movement, George had, and he started to funnel everything through this channel of Krishna. And he started to say things like, you know, if you chant his name long enough, you will actually see him, he will actually manifest in front of you. And it sounds to me like George did start to get some very clear visions of Krishna as a living reality. He stopped taking LSD after a while and went straight into the meditation. And like I said, I don't know to what extent he became a real fundamentalist. Some of the people he was hanging around with and listening to were Krishna fundamentalists. In other words, they literally believed that the being Krishna was God, you know, in the same way that you know, hardline Christians, they absolutely fundamentally believed that Jesus was God or there was the Son of God. I mean, you know, there's all sorts of debates about that one, isn't there? But I think, I mean, my interpretation is as we get into the 70s, I think George still kept his Krishna faith. You know, interestingly, when his house was broken into by that madman, you know, whenever it was in the late 90s, George's immediate reaction was to chant Hare Krishna at him. So I think he still did believe in it, but maybe not as fundamentally. You know, I think maybe his beliefs did widen out a little bit. He seemed more interested later on in the kind of general ideas behind Hinduism. So if you're asking the question, what did George believe? Clearly he believed in the immortal soul. He believed that the most important thing that we have is our individual souls and what is our relationship with God. He famously said, you know, we need to know, where do I come from? Who am I? Where am I going? For George, it was all about understanding the self and trying to understand what role the self played in the fundamental network of reality. And what chiefly concerned him was how he was going to transform himself into a purely spiritual being. He often would say to friends, you know, I just wish I could vanish into a ray of light and disappear. And you know, therein lay the great contradiction with George. You know, he was this guy who had this absolutely palatial house, and he was into fast cars and all this, but you know, he claimed to be totally, or he claimed to want to completely transcend the physical world. So George was seeking nirvana. He was seeking freedom, ultimate freedom from reincarnation, not wanting to be reborn as another human or as something further down the food chain. And I think that's my interpretation of what George believed. He didn't really believe in the physical world as an ultimate reality. I don't think I think he even saw his wife and his son as manifestations of an ultimate reality, and he pursued his life trying to attain transcendence from the physical world. I'm not going to try and discuss all George's individual songs, but certainly going back to this record again, I was reminded of just what a deep seam of this spirituality runs through George's work. And you know, you've only got to listen to these songs to actually hear it coming through. And of course, it you know, it's cropped up a lot on Beatles songs such as Within You and Without You, and Love You Too, and all these songs. And George could get a bit preachy at times, but it all kind of added up to the funky reality that was George Harrison, the kind of contradictory, massive impulses and kind of insights and ideas that he had, some of which seem a bit wacky. And I don't know, I think it's a shame in a way that people don't take more notice of it. I think it does make George's work quite interesting. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, that's my take on it. What did George Harrison really believe? Thanks, folks. Bye.